My stepfather said I'd never make it without his name, so I changed my name and became more successful than he ever was. Growing up in suburban Pennsylvania, I always felt like an outsider in my own home after my mom remarried when I was 12. My stepfather had this way of making everything about himself and his legacy, constantly reminding me that I was lucky to carry his surname now. He would sit at the dinner table every night, going on about how his connections in the business world were the only reason our family had any standing in the community. The man owned a mid-sized logistics company that his father had started, and he acted like he was some kind of corporate royalty because of it. My real father had died in a car accident when I was 8, and honestly, I barely remembered him except for the way he used to laugh at my terrible jokes and how he always smelled like coffee and aftershave. My mom struggled for years as a single parent, working 2 jobs just to keep us afloat, and when she met my stepfather, I think she saw him as this stable provider who could give us security. What she didn't see was how he would slowly chip away at both of our confidence over the years. The worst part wasn't even the constant lectures about responsibility and living up to his family name. It was the way he would dismiss every single thing I showed interest in. When I got excited about building computers in middle school, he would roll his eyes and say that tech was just a phase for kids who couldn't handle real business. When I started getting good grades in mathematics and science, he would grudgingly acknowledge it but always followed up with comments about how academic success meant nothing without practical business sense. By the time I reached high school, I had learned to keep my mouth shut about my achievements and interests. I was getting straight A's, had been accepted into several advanced placement courses, and even won a regional science fair with a project on renewable energy systems. But at home, none of that mattered because I wasn't showing interest in taking over his precious logistics empire someday. The breaking point came during my senior year when I was applying to colleges. I had been secretly working on applications to some of the top engineering schools in the country, and I was thrilled when I got accepted to a prestigious program with a partial scholarship. When I finally worked up the courage to tell my family at dinner, my stepfather just stared at me for a long moment before shaking his head. He told me that I was being unrealistic, and that engineering was a field where you needed connections and family backing to really succeed. According to him, I should be grateful that he was willing to let me start at the bottom of his company and work my way up, learning the business from the ground up. The whole conversation made my stomach turn, but what really got to me was when he said that without his name and his reputation, I would never amount to anything significant in this world. My mom just sat there silently, picking at her food, and I realized that she had been beaten down by his constant negativity just as much as I had been. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to prove him wrong, but I was going to do it on my own terms without any help from him or his precious family name. I accepted the engineering scholarship and moved across the country to start college, but before I left, I did something that shocked everyone. I legally changed my last name back to my biological father's surname. The paperwork was surprisingly simple, and within a few weeks, I had officially reclaimed my original identity. When I told my stepfather what I had done, he just laughed and said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. College was incredible in ways I had never imagined possible. For the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who valued intelligence, creativity, and hard work rather than family connections and inherited wealth. I threw myself into my studies with a passion that surprised even me, staying up late in the computer labs, joining engineering clubs, and working on projects that actually excited me instead of just going through the motions. During my sophomore year, I started working part-time for a small tech startup that was developing software for renewable energy management. The work was challenging and the pay was minimal, but I loved every minute of it. I was learning real-world applications for everything I was studying, and I was working alongside people who shared my passion for innovation and problem-solving. The company was run by a recent graduate who had dropped out of his PhD program to pursue his entrepreneurial dreams. He was only about 5 years older than me, but he had this vision for how technology could transform the energy industry that was absolutely infectious. Working for him taught me more about business and leadership than any lecture my stepfather had ever given me. By my junior year, I had been promoted to a more senior position at the startup, and I was making more money than I had ever imagined possible for a college student. More importantly, I was contributing to projects that I genuinely believed could make a difference in the world. We were developing systems that could help businesses reduce their energy consumption and integrate renewable sources more effectively. The real turning point came when our small startup got acquired by a major technology corporation for an amount that made my head spin. As one of the early employees, I received a significant payout that was more money than my stepfather made in 2 years at his logistics company. But the financial gain wasn't even the most satisfying part. It was the validation that I could succeed based on my own merit and hard work. I graduated summa cum laude with a degree in electrical engineering and immediately got offers from several major tech companies. The offer I accepted came with a starting salary that was double what my stepfather was making after decades in his industry. When I called my mom to tell her the news, I could hear the pride in her voice, but also a sadness that I think came from realizing how much my stepfather had held both of us back. Moving to Silicon Valley was like entering a completely different world. The pace was fast, the expectations were high, and everyone around me was pushing the boundaries of what was possible with technology. I was working on projects that involved artificial intelligence, machine learning, and advanced energy systems. Exactly the kind of cutting-edge work that my stepfather had dismissed as impractical fantasies. Within 2 years, I had been promoted twice and was leading a team of engineers on a project that would revolutionize how electrical grids manage renewable energy integration. The work was challenging in ways that pushed me to grow professionally and personally, and I was making more money than I had ever dreamed possible. But more than that, I was doing work that felt meaningful and important. The project my team was working on caught the attention of several major news outlets, and I found myself being interviewed about the future of clean energy technology. It was surreal to see my name in articles and hear myself described as a rising star in the industry. Everything my stepfather had said about needing his name and connections to succeed was proving to be completely wrong. Around this time, I decided to start my own company focused on developing smart grid technology for smaller communities and businesses. The idea came from my experience growing up in a small town where the electrical infrastructure was outdated and inefficient. I wanted to create solutions that could help communities like mine transition to cleaner, more reliable energy systems. Starting my own company was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I used my savings from my previous job, along with some angel investment funding, to get things off the ground. The first year was brutal. I was working 16-hour days, living on ramen noodles and coffee, and constantly worried about whether we would make it to the next month. But slowly, things started to come together. We landed our first major contract with a small city in Oregon that wanted to upgrade their entire electrical grid system. The project was complex and challenging, but we delivered results that exceeded their expectations. Word spread quickly in the industry, and soon we had more potential clients than we could handle. The business grew rapidly over the next few years, and I found myself managing a team of talented engineers and business professionals who shared my vision for transforming energy infrastructure. We were working on projects across the country, helping communities reduce their carbon footprint while improving their electrical reliability and efficiency. The financial success was beyond anything I had imagined when I first started the company. We were generating millions in revenue, and I was personally making more money than my stepfather's entire company brought in annually. But the real satisfaction came from knowing that our work was making a genuine difference in people's lives. One of our biggest projects involved designing a microgrid system for a rural community in Montana that had been struggling with frequent power outages. The existing infrastructure was decades old and couldn't handle the demands of modern life. Our team developed a solution that combined solar panels, wind turbines, and battery storage systems to create a self-sufficient electrical grid that was both more reliable and more environmentally friendly. When the system went online, the mayor of the town called me personally to thank our company for the work we had done. He told me that children in the community were now able to do their homework by reliable electric light instead of candles, and that local businesses were thriving because they no longer had to worry about losing power during critical operations. Moments like that reminded me why I had chosen this path in the first place. It wasn't about proving my stepfather wrong or making more money than him. It was about using my skills and knowledge to solve real problems and improve people's lives. The financial success was just a bonus that came from doing work that mattered. As my company continued to grow, I started getting invitations to speak at industry conferences and serve on advisory boards for clean energy initiatives. I was being recognized as a thought leader in the field, and my opinions were sought after by policymakers and business leaders who were trying to navigate the transition to renewable energy. The most unexpected recognition came when I was invited to testify before a congressional committee about the future of America's electrical grid infrastructure. Standing in that hearing room, explaining how new technologies could revolutionize our energy systems, I felt a profound sense of purpose and accomplishment that had nothing to do with money or status. After the hearing, several major news networks wanted to interview me about my company and my vision for the future of energy. During one of these interviews, the reporter asked me about my background and what had motivated me to start my own company. I found myself talking about my stepfather's belief that success required family connections and inherited advantages. The reporter was fascinated by the story of how I had changed my name and built my career from scratch. She asked if I had any regrets about walking away from my stepfather's business empire, and I laughed because the question showed how much she didn't understand about the situation. His logistics company, which had seemed so impressive to me as a teenager, was actually quite small and unremarkable compared to the businesses I was now working with regularly. That interview ended up being featured in several major publications, and the story resonated with a lot of people who had overcome similar challenges in their own lives. I started receiving messages from young people who were dealing with family members who didn't believe in their dreams, and I tried to respond to as many as I could with encouragement and practical advice. The most satisfying message came from a teenager in Ohio, whose stepfather had been telling her that she wasn't smart enough to pursue a career in medicine. She had seen my interview and decided to apply to pre-med programs despite her stepfather's discouragement. When she got accepted to her dream school with a full scholarship, she sent me a photo of her acceptance letter with a note thanking me for showing her that family doubters don't have to define your future. Around this time, I decided to reach out to my mom, who I had been talking to regularly but hadn't seen in person for almost 3 years. Our relationship had become strained after I changed my name and moved across the country, partly because my stepfather made it clear that he considered my success to be a personal insult to him and his family. When I called to invite her to visit me in California, she was excited but also nervous about how my stepfather would react. I told her that she was welcome to come alone or with him, but that I wasn't going to hide my success or apologize for the choices I had made. After some discussion, she decided to come by herself for a long weekend. Seeing my mom in my new environment was emotional for both of us. She had never traveled to California before, and she was amazed by the technology company offices, the innovative projects we were working on, and the team of brilliant people I had assembled. During dinner at a nice restaurant overlooking the Pacific Ocean, she told me how proud she was of what I had accomplished, but also how sorry she was for not standing up to my stepfather more when I was younger. We talked for hours about everything that had happened over the years, and I realized that she had been just as trapped by his negativity as I had been. She had started to believe his constant message that success came from connections and family status rather than hard work and talent. Seeing my achievements had helped her realize that she had been settling for much less than she deserved in her own life. The visit was a turning point in our relationship, and we started talking more regularly after she returned home. She began taking classes at the local community college, something she had always wanted to do but had been discouraged from pursuing. She also started setting boundaries with my stepfather about his constant negativity and criticism. My stepfather, meanwhile, was apparently not handling my success very well. According to my mom, he had become increasingly bitter and defensive, constantly making excuses for why his business wasn't growing and blaming external factors for his problems. He had stopped asking about me entirely, which was actually a relief for everyone involved. The contrast between his stagnation and my growth became even more apparent when I decided to expand my company's operations to the East Coast. We were opening a new office in Philadelphia, which was only about an hour from my old hometown. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now bringing high-paying jobs and cutting-edge technology to the same region where my stepfather had told me I would never amount to anything. The Philadelphia office opening was covered by several local news outlets, and I found myself back in familiar territory doing interviews about our expansion plans. One reporter asked if I had any family in the area, and I mentioned that my mother lived nearby. The story that ran the next day included a photo of me standing in front of our new office building, with a caption identifying me by my original family name. My mom called me that evening to tell me that several people from our old neighborhood had seen the article and were talking about how proud they were that someone from their community had achieved such success. She also mentioned, somewhat hesitantly, that my stepfather had seen the article and had been unusually quiet about it. I didn't give his reaction much thought at the time, but a few weeks later, I received a completely unexpected phone call. My stepfather had somehow gotten my direct office number and wanted to talk to me. The conversation was awkward and stilted, but the gist was that he was having serious financial problems with his logistics company and was wondering if I might be interested in some kind of business partnership. The irony of the situation was almost too much to handle. The man who had spent years telling me that I would never succeed without his name and connections was now asking me to bail him out of his own financial problems. He tried to frame it as a mutually beneficial opportunity, but it was clear that he was desperate and running out of options. I listened to his entire pitch without interrupting, and then I told him that I would think about it and get back to him. After we hung up, I sat in my office looking out at the city skyline and thinking about how dramatically our positions had reversed over the years. He had spent so much time looking down on me that he had failed to notice how far I had risen above him. After discussing the situation with my business advisors, I decided to make my stepfather an offer, but not the kind he was expecting. Instead of a partnership or bailout, I offered to buy his logistics company outright for a fair market price. The purchase would allow him to pay off his debts and retire comfortably, while giving me an opportunity to modernize the business and potentially integrate it with my energy infrastructure work. The offer shocked him and he asked for time to consider it. I told him that the offer would remain open for 30 days, and that if he decided to accept, we could handle the entire transaction through lawyers to keep things professional. I also made it clear that this was a business decision, not a personal one, and that I didn't expect it to change our relationship or family dynamics. He ended up accepting the offer, and within 60 days, I owned the company where he had worked for over 20 years. The acquisition made sense from a business perspective, because logistics and supply chain management were becoming increasingly important in the renewable energy industry, and having that expertise in-house would give us a competitive advantage. The transition was handled entirely by our respective legal teams, and I made sure that all of his employees were treated fairly and given opportunities to stay with the company under new management. Several of them were excited about the potential to work on clean energy projects, and they brought valuable experience and local knowledge that complemented our existing capabilities. My stepfather retired quietly and moved to Florida with my mom, who was finally able to pursue her own interests without his constant criticism and negativity. She started volunteering with environmental conservation groups and eventually became a certified master gardener, something she had always been passionate about but had never had the time or encouragement to pursue. The success of the logistics acquisition led to other opportunities, and my company continued to grow and evolve. We were now working on projects that spanned the entire energy supply chain, from renewable generation to storage systems to smart grid management. The work was more complex and challenging than ever, but also more rewarding because we were making a real impact on the transition to sustainable energy. 5 years after buying my stepfather's company, I was invited to speak at a major industry conference about the future of integrated energy systems. The audience included some of the most influential people in the energy sector, and I was being introduced as one of the leading innovators in the field. As I stood on that stage, looking out at hundreds of people who had come to hear my ideas, I thought about that dinner table conversation so many years ago when I was told I would never amount to anything without my stepfather's name. The presentation went well, and afterward I was approached by several people who wanted to discuss potential collaborations and partnerships. One of them was a venture capitalist who was particularly interested in our approach to community-scale energy projects. He mentioned that he had been following our work for years and was impressed by how we had managed to grow so quickly while maintaining our focus on sustainable solutions. During our conversation, he asked me about my background and what had motivated me to start my own company. I found myself telling him the story of my stepfather's prediction that I would never succeed without his name and connections. The investor laughed and said that some of the most successful entrepreneurs he knew had been driven by similar experiences of being underestimated or dismissed by family members. That conversation led to a major investment opportunity that would allow us to expand our operations internationally. We were being offered the chance to bring our energy solutions to developing countries where reliable electricity was still a luxury for many people. The potential impact was enormous, and the financial opportunity was equally impressive. As I considered the investment offer, I realized that my success had moved far beyond proving my stepfather wrong. I was now in a position to make a meaningful difference in the world, and the work we were doing could improve the lives of millions of people who lacked access to reliable, clean energy. The boy who had been told he would never amount to anything was now being offered the chance to help solve one of the world's most pressing challenges. The international expansion was successful beyond our wildest expectations. We started with pilot projects in 3 countries and quickly scaled up to major infrastructure initiatives that were transforming entire regions. The work was challenging and sometimes dangerous, but it was also the most fulfilling thing I had ever done professionally. Today, my company operates in over 20 countries and employs thousands of people who are working to build a more sustainable energy future. We have been recognized by numerous organizations for our innovative approaches to clean energy infrastructure, and I have been invited to advise governments and international organizations on energy policy and development strategies. The financial success has been extraordinary, but what matters most to me is the impact we are having on people's lives. Every time I visit one of our project sites and see children studying by electric light for the first time, or meet a small business owner who can now operate reliably thanks to our microgrid systems, I am reminded of why I chose this path. My stepfather's prediction that I would never make it without his name turned out to be spectacularly wrong, but I am actually grateful for his doubt, because it motivated me to prove that success comes from hard work, innovation, and persistence, rather than inherited advantages or family connections. The name I chose to carry forward was the one that reminded me of my real father's love and support, not the one that came with expectations and limitations. Looking back on this journey, I realized that changing my name was about much more than rejecting my stepfather's negativity. It was about reclaiming my own identity and choosing to define success on my own terms rather than accepting someone else's narrow vision of what was possible for my life.